I knew something was wrong the moment I walked into the waiting room at Walsh Media. The receptionist's eyes flicked up from her screen, then immediately away. Her smile was too tight, too forced. When she asked me to confirm my appointment, I caught the flicker of confusion in her expression. "Blair Lynch," I said. "Interview with Catherine Walsh at 10 a.m. Her fingers tapped across the keyboard. "I see," she said slowly. "Ms. Lynch, there seems to be an issue with your appointment. Ms. Walsh had to reschedule all her interviews today. Let me make a call." My stomach clenched. This couldn't be happening. Not today. Not after everything I'd done to get here. I clutched my portfolio tighter, scanning the sleek glass and chrome lobby. The walls were adorned with award-winning magazine covers from Walsh Media's flagship publication, Style and Substance. Each cover featured beautiful people in beautiful clothes, every image meticulously crafted to showcase perfection. The receptionist's hushed phone conversation caught my attention. "Yes, the Lynch appointment. I understand. Yes, I'll let her know." She hung up and fixed me with a sympathetic smile that made my skin crawl. "Ms. Lynch, I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding. The position has been filled internally. Ms. Walsh extends her apologies for the inconvenience." The words hit me like a physical blow. I'd spent weeks preparing for this interview, researching the company, polishing my portfolio, practicing responses to every possible question. This was my dream job, my chance to break into high-profile fashion journalism after years of grinding away at a small local magazine. "There must be some mistake," I said, struggling to keep my voice steady. "I confirmed this appointment yesterday. I'm sorry, Ms. Lynch. These decisions sometimes happen quickly. If you'd like to leave your portfolio, I can make sure it gets to our HR department for future opportunities." I knew exactly what that meant. My carefully curated work would be tossed into a drawer, forgotten before the elevator doors closed behind me. "May I speak with Catherine directly?" I asked, desperation creeping into my voice. "Just for a moment?" The receptionist's expression hardened slightly. "Ms. Walsh is in meetings all day. I can pass along a message, but I'm afraid that's the best I can do." I stood there, clutching my portfolio like a shield, acutely aware of how pathetic I must look. The pristine lobby suddenly felt suffocating. I mumbled some words of thanks and turned to leave when the elevator doors opened, and I froze. Miranda Stanley stepped out, her tall figure commanding attention even in this temple to fashion and beauty. My stepmother, one of the most influential fashion editors in the industry, and as of this moment, my prime suspect for why my interview had mysteriously vanished. Her eyes widened slightly when she saw me, surprise quickly masked by a practiced smile. "Blair, darling, what a delightful surprise." Her voice carried across the lobby, drawing everyone's attention. She air-kissed my cheeks, her expensive perfume engulfing me. "What brings you here?" I pulled back, studying her face. The perfectly applied makeup, the calculated warmth in her expression that never quite reached her eyes. "I had an interview scheduled with Catherine Walsh," I said carefully, watching for her reaction. "Apparently, the position has been filled." "Oh, such a shame." Miranda adjusted her designer blazer, not a hint of genuine sympathy in her voice. "But you know how it is in this industry. Timing is everything." Time slowed as the pieces clicked into place. Miranda had known about my interview. She had connections throughout the industry, including at Walsh Media, and she had never wanted me to follow in her footsteps, despite her public proclamations of support for her darling stepdaughter. "Yes," I replied, a new coldness in my voice. "Timing is everything." Miranda's smile remained fixed, but her eyes narrowed slightly. She knew that I knew. "Perhaps next time, dear. You're still young. There's no rush to climb the ladder too quickly." She lowered her voice, ostensibly for privacy, but her words were clear enough. "Staying a failure will keep you humble. It's really for the best." Before I could respond, she squeezed my arm and glided toward the receptionist, who immediately straightened in her chair. "Miranda, Catherine is expecting you. I'll let her know you're here." I stood there, humiliation burning through me as the truth became undeniable. Miranda had sabotaged my interview. My own stepmother had deliberately derailed my career opportunity, just as she'd done countless times before, always in ways I couldn't prove. As I pushed through the revolving door onto the busy Manhattan street, clutching my useless portfolio, I made a promise to myself. This was the last time Miranda Stanley would undermine me. I didn't know how yet, but somehow I would turn this around. And when I did, I'd make sure she realized exactly what she had done and exactly who she had done it to. The spring air hit my face as I emerged onto the sidewalk, but I barely felt it. My mind was already racing ahead, formulating a plan that would change everything for Miranda, for me, and for the toxic industry that had created her. The subway car rocked gently as I headed downtown, away from the gleaming Walsh Media building and the shattered remains of my ambitions. My phone buzzed in my bag, probably my roommate Zoe checking in about the interview. I couldn't bear to answer it yet, couldn't find the words to explain how spectacularly everything had fallen apart. Instead, I stared at my reflection in the subway window, dark circles under my eyes from late nights perfecting my portfolio, hair carefully styled for an interview that never happened, wearing the one designer blazer I owned, a cast-off from Miranda that she'd generously given me after declaring it last season. Miranda Stanley hadn't always been in my life, until I was 12. It had just been me and Dad after Mom died when I was 4. We were a team, getting by in our small apartment in Queens, Dad working long hours as a photojournalist while pursuing his artistic photography on the side. When he met Miranda at a gallery opening featuring some of his work, everything changed. Miranda was everything Dad wasn't: polished, connected, ambitious. As fashion editor at Elegance magazine, she lived in a world of glamour and influence. Dad was swept away by her, and within a year, they were married and we had moved into her Manhattan apartment. I was old enough to understand what was happening, but young enough to hope for the best. Maybe Miranda would become the mother figure I barely remembered having. Maybe her daughter Livia, 3 years older than me, would become the sister I never had. Neither happened. Miranda's interest in me extended only as far as molding me into someone who wouldn't embarrass her at industry events. Livia, already shaped by years under Miranda's influence, treated me with the same dismissive tolerance her mother did. As for Dad, he changed. His artistic work took a backseat to commercial photography that paid better. He traveled more, worked longer hours, all to maintain the lifestyle Miranda expected. When he died of a heart attack 5 years ago, I lost the only person who truly cared about me in that household. By then, I was in college, studying journalism. Livia had already escaped to Paris, distancing herself from her mother in the only way she could. That left Miranda and me bound by nothing except a marriage certificate that had died with my father and a shared address I couldn't afford to leave. The subway screeched to a halt at my stop, jarring me back to the present. I mechanically exited and climbed the stairs to street level, walking the 3 blocks to the small office of City Style, the local magazine where I'd worked for the past 2 years since graduating. City Style wasn't glamorous. Our circulation was modest, our offices cramped, and our budget perpetually stretched thin. But it was honest work, showcasing local designers and addressing fashion with substance rather than just flash. My editor, Diane, had given me increasing responsibility, allowing me to shape our coverage and develop my voice as a journalist. Still, I wanted more. The position at Walsh Media would have been my breakthrough, a chance to influence fashion journalism on a larger scale while earning enough to finally move out of Miranda's shadow completely. I pushed open the door to our office, hoping to slip in unnoticed, but Diane spotted me immediately. Her eyebrows shot up. "Blair? What are you doing back so soon? Don't tell me the interview was that short. I dropped my portfolio on my desk and sank into my chair. There was no interview. The position was filled internally. Diane frowned, coming over to perch on the edge of my desk. At 52, she had the no-nonsense attitude of someone who had fought her way through a tough industry with the laugh lines to prove she hadn't lost her humanity in the process. That's strange. You confirmed yesterday, right? I did, and I think I know exactly what happened. I lowered my voice, even though our 3 other colleagues were absorbed in their own work. Miranda happened. Understanding dawned on Diane's face. She knew my complicated history with my stepmother. You think she interfered? I know she did. She showed up right after I was turned away. The timing was too perfect. I ran my hands through my carefully styled hair, no longer caring if I messed it up. She practically admitted it, in her own way. Told me staying a failure will keep me humble. Diane's expression hardened. In the 2 years I'd worked for her, I'd never seen her truly angry, but she looked close now. That's beyond inappropriate. That's sabotage. It's what she does, I said bitterly. She's always undermining me, always making sure I know my place. But I can never prove it. It's always a canceled opportunity, a lost contact, a missed connection, all with plausible deniability. Diane studied me for a long moment. So, what are you going to do about it this time? The question caught me off guard. In the past, I'd always swallowed my frustration, kept my head down, and tried harder. But something had snapped today. I don't know yet, I admitted. But I'm not letting her get away with it this time. Diane nodded slowly. Good, because I've been waiting for you to fight back. She stood up, decision made. Take the rest of the day off, clear your head, then come back tomorrow ready to work. Work on what? My next piece isn't due until next week. A small smile played at the corners of Diane's mouth. On your revenge, Blair. The kind that doesn't just get even, the kind that makes things better. She returned to her office, calling over her shoulder. Sometimes the best response to sabotage isn't just success, it's transformation. I sat at my desk, turning her words over in my mind. For the first time since walking into that Walsh Media lobby, I felt something other than humiliation and anger. I felt the stirrings of determination and maybe even hope. My phone buzzed again. This time I pulled it out and saw a text from Zoe. How did it go? Dying to hear. I took a deep breath and typed, interview canceled. Long story, but I think it's time to make some changes. Are you home? Her response came immediately. Yes. Wine is already open. See you soon. I gathered my things, nodding goodbye to my colleagues. As I pushed open the door to leave, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the glass. I looked different somehow, less defeated than I had on the subway, more focused. Miranda Stanley had been controlling the narrative of my life for too long. It was time to write my own story. My apartment building in Astoria was a far cry from Miranda's sleek Upper East Side penthouse. The elevator was perpetually out of service, and the hallway carpets had seen better decades. But the moment I walked into the apartment I shared with Zoe, I felt something Miranda's pristine home had never offered: safety. Zoe bounded toward me, wine glass in hand, her bright blue hair a stark contrast to her pale skin. Spill! Why did they cancel? Did they reschedule? Her expression fell as she took in my face. Oh no, that bad? I dropped my bag and took the offered wine glass, downing half of it in one swallow. Remember how I've always suspected Miranda of interfering with my career opportunities but could never prove it? Zoe's eyes widened. No way, she didn't. She absolutely did. And this time, she all but admitted it to my face. I kicked off my heels and collapsed onto our second-hand sofa. She showed up right after I was told the position was filled, with this look of satisfaction. That evil, designer-wearing witch. Zoe sat beside me, refilling my glass. What are you going to do? I leaned my head back against the sofa. That's what Diane asked me. And for once, I don't think I'm going to just suck it up and move on. Finally, Zoe exclaimed. I've been waiting 3 years for you to say that. But I need to be smart about this. Miranda has connections everywhere in the industry. One wrong move, and I could be blacklisted from every fashion publication in New York. Zoe tucked her legs under her, shifting into what I called her strategy mode. Despite her artistic appearance, the blue hair, the tattoos peeking out from under her vintage t-shirt, Zoe was one of the most analytical people I knew. It's what made her so good at her job as a UX designer. Okay, let's think about this logically, she said. What does Miranda care about most? Her reputation, I answered without hesitation. Her position in the industry. Her image as the untouchable, fashion oracle. And what do you know about her that might threaten that? I considered the question. More than she realizes. I've lived in her house for 10 years. I've overheard conversations, seen documents, noticed patterns. Like what? Zoe pressed. I hesitated. Despite everything, there was still a part of me that felt uncomfortable exposing Miranda's secrets. She was, after all, my father's widow. But the memory of her smug face in that lobby steeled my resolve. Like the fact that she's not above destroying young designers who don't offer her the right considerations, or that she's burying stories about the real working conditions in certain fashion houses, or that she's been manipulating coverage to benefit brands that give her kickbacks. Zoe whistled. That's serious stuff, Blair. Not just mean stepmother territory. That's unethical journalism. I know, and it's not just her. It's endemic in parts of the industry. The fashion world can be brutal and corrupt behind all the glamour, but without proof, it's just gossip, and gossip can't hurt Miranda Stanley. So we need evidence, Zoe concluded, already reaching for her laptop. Hard evidence that can't be dismissed or explained away. We? I raised an eyebrow. Obviously we. Did you think I'd let you take on the wicked stepmother alone? She opened her laptop, fingers flying. Across the keyboard. First rule of battle, know your enemy. Let's see what Miranda's been up to publicly. As Zoe started searching, my phone buzzed with an incoming call. The screen showed Miranda, with a photo I'd taken of her at a charity gala last year, looking immaculate in Valentino, smiling benevolently for the cameras while squeezing my arm hard enough to leave marks when I'd accidentally stepped into the frame of a photographer's shot. It's her, I said, my finger hovering over the screen. Zoe looked up. Answer it. Act normal. Don't let her know you're planning anything. I took a deep breath and accepted the call. Hello, Miranda. Blair, darling. Her voice dripped with artificial concern. I've been thinking about our run-in this morning. Such a disappointment about that interview. Yes, it was unexpected, I managed, keeping my tone neutral. These things happen in our industry. Not everyone is cut out for the high-pressure environment at places like Walsh Media. Perhaps it's for the best. I bit back the retort that rose to my lips. Perhaps. I'm hosting a small dinner tomorrow night for some industry people. Catherine Walsh will be there, actually. You should join us. It would be good for you to network, even if the position didn't work out. I nearly dropped the phone. Was she serious? Inviting me to watch her socialize with the woman who had just rejected me for a job Miranda had ensured I wouldn't get? Then I realized this wasn't kindness. This was Miranda's way of twisting the knife, of making sure I understood my place in her world. She wanted me there as a reminder of her power, a living example of her ability to control outcomes. But two could play that game. That sounds wonderful, I said, injecting warmth into my voice. Thank you for thinking of me. There was a brief pause as if my acceptance had surprised her. Well, good. 8 o'clock. Wear the Stella McCartney I gave you for Christmas. It's the only thing in your closet that's appropriate. Of course, I'll see you tomorrow night. After she hung up, I looked at Zoe, who was staring at me with disbelief. "Are you seriously going to her dinner party?" she demanded. "Absolutely," I replied, a plan already forming in my mind. Miranda thinks she's inviting me to witness my own humiliation. Instead, she's giving me access to exactly the people I need to talk to. Starting with Catherine Walsh. Zoe's expression shifted from concern to admiration. "Blair Lynch, I didn't know you had it in you." "Neither did I admitted, surprised by my own determination. "But I'm done being the victim in Miranda's story." I picked up my wine glass again, raising it in a toast. To gathering evidence, making connections, and finally taking control of my own narrative. Zoe clinked her glass against mine. "And to sending Miranda Stanley a message she'll never forget." As we drank, I felt something shift inside me, a resolve hardening into certainty. Tomorrow night would be the first step toward not just reclaiming my career from Miranda's interference, but perhaps toward changing the very industry that had enabled her behavior for so long. For the first time in years, I felt truly awake to the possibilities before me. Miranda Stanley had taught me many lessons over the years, but the most important one she'd never intended: how to transform pain into purpose. Miranda's penthouse gleamed with understated luxury, the kind of wealth that didn't need to announce itself. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the Manhattan skyline, the city lights twinkling like earthbound stars against the evening darkness. Everything was immaculate, the white orchids precisely arranged, the artwork strategically lit, the furniture positioned to create an atmosphere of casual sophistication. I smoothed down the Stella McCartney dress Miranda had insisted I wear, hating how perfectly it fit, hating that I'd had no choice but to comply with her sartorial demands. At least the deep emerald color complemented my auburn hair, which I'd styled in loose waves instead of the severe updo Miranda preferred. "Blair, darling, there you are." Miranda glided toward me, glass of champagne in hand. At 52, she was still strikingly beautiful, her blonde hair expertly colored and cut, her figure maintained through rigorous discipline. She air-kissed my cheeks, her lips never actually touching my skin. "I was beginning to think you'd changed your mind." "And miss an opportunity to network? Never." I kept my voice light, matching her public persona tone for tone. Her eyes narrowed, slightly at my confidence, but her smile remained fixed. "Of course. Come, let me introduce you to everyone." The small dinner turned out to include 12 guests, all strategically selected from the upper echelons of the fashion industry. Magazine editors, designers, photographers, and influencers, each one a potential ally or obstacle in my developing plan, and there, engaged in conversation with a silver-haired photographer I recognized from industry events, was Catherine Walsh herself. Seeing her sent a jolt through me, the woman who had been supposed to interview me, who had likely been manipulated by Miranda into canceling that interview. Miranda steered me around the room, making introductions that were carefully calculated to emphasize my junior status. "This is my stepdaughter, Blair. She's working at one of those little local magazines, gaining experience." The subtext was clear. Blair is harmless, unimportant, not a threat to any of you. I smiled through it all, accepting champagne from a passing server, engaging in the superficial conversations that constituted networking in this world. All the while, I was observing, listening, filing away information for later use. Finally, Miranda brought me to Catherine Walsh. "Catherine, you remember I mentioned my stepdaughter? This is Blair." Catherine turned, her sharp eyes assessing me with professional detachment. She was younger than Miranda, maybe 45, with a sleek bob and the confident posture of someone who had fought her way to the top. "Blair, yes. Lynch, correct? I believe we had an appointment scheduled." "That was canceled, as I understand." I replied carefully, watching for her reaction. A flicker of confusion crossed her face. "Was it?" "I was told you had withdrawn your application because you'd accepted another position." The confirmation of Miranda's interference was like a punch to the gut, despite my suspicions. I managed to keep my expression neutral. There seems to have been some miscommunication. Catherine's gaze shifted between Miranda and me, something calculating in her expression. Interesting. Perhaps we should talk later. Before I could respond, Miranda smoothly inserted herself into the conversation. Blair is quite happy at her current position, aren't you, dear? Not everyone is suited for the high-pressure environment. At Walsh Media, I felt a flash of anger, but channeled it into a pleasant smile. I believe in finding the right fit, and in transparency about the process. Catherine's eyebrows rose slightly, but Miranda was already steering the conversation toward a recent Fashion Week controversy, effectively dismissing my comment. As dinner progressed, I found myself seated between a menswear designer whose work I genuinely admired and an older man who was introduced as Victor Winters, the publisher of Elegance. Miranda's boss, technically, though everyone knew she was the real power at the magazine. Victor was in his 60s, with the ruddy complexion of someone who enjoyed good wine and rich food. He regarded me with unexpected interest. So you're Stanley's stepdaughter. Following in her footsteps, are you? I'm a fashion journalist, yes, I replied, though I'd say I'm forging my own path. He chuckled, taking a sip of his wine. Good answer. Miranda casts a long shadow. Not easy to work in this industry with her as family, I imagine. There was something knowing in his tone that caught my attention. It has its challenges, I admitted. I bet it does. He glanced down the table where Miranda was holding court, gesturing elegantly as she delivered what was undoubtedly a perfectly crafted anecdote. Your father was James Lynch, the photographer, wasn't he? Yes, I said, surprised by the change in subject. Did you know him? Met him a few times. Talented man, authentic. He said the last word with emphasis, as if it carried special significance. Not a common quality in our world. I studied Victor more carefully. Was he just making conversation, or was there a message beneath his words? No, it isn't. Authenticity is undervalued in fashion journalism these days, he continued, cutting into his perfectly cooked steak. Everyone's afraid to speak truth, to power, to expose the less glamorous realities of the industry. Too many relationships to protect, too many advertising dollars at stake. My pulse quickened. This wasn't idle small talk. Some of us still believe in the importance of honest reporting, I said carefully. Victor met my eyes directly. Do you? Interesting. He took another sip of wine. I've been thinking our industry needs a reckoning. Too many secrets, too many abuses swept under custom-designed rugs. Before I could respond, Miranda's voice cut through the ambient conversation. Victor, you're monopolizing my stepdaughter. Don't bore her with publishing talk. Victor smiled, benignly. Just getting to know the next generation, Miranda. Investment in the future and all that. Miranda's laugh was practiced. Perfect. Blair has quite a way to go before you need to invest in her, Victor. The dismissal stung, but the brief conversation with Victor had given me something valuable, a potential ally I hadn't expected. After dinner, as the guests moved to the living room for coffee and digestives, I managed to position myself near Catherine Walsh, who was examining a black and white photograph on Miranda's wall. That's one of my father's, I said, nodding toward the image. A striking street scene capturing a moment of unexpected beauty in an urban setting. Catherine looked at me with new interest. Your father was James Lynch? I didn't make the connection. His work was extraordinary. Thank you. He would have appreciated hearing that. She studied me for a moment. About that interview situation, it's fine, I interrupted, aware that we might be overheard. Miscommunications happen. Yes, they do. Catherine reached into her clutch and extracted a business card, offering it to me with deliberate intent. But I prefer clarity. Call my office on Monday. My assistant will put you through. I accepted the card, hope flaring inside me. Thank you, I will. As Catherine moved away, I felt a presence at my shoulder. Miranda stood there, her expression pleasant, but her eyes cold. Making connections, Blair? How enterprising of you. Isn't that why you invited me? To network? Of course. She sipped, her after-dinner drink studying me over the rim of her glass. Though I'd be careful about pursuing opportunities at Walsh Media. Catherine can be difficult to work for. Not everyone survives her demanding standards. The threat was thinly veiled, but I refused to be intimidated. I appreciate your concern, but I think I'll make my own assessment. Something shifted in Miranda's expression. A flicker of surprise, perhaps even respect, quickly masked by her usual cool detachment. As you wish. Just remember that in this industry, reputation is everything, and reputations can be so easily damaged. She drifted away to attend to her other guests, leaving me with a clear understanding of the battle lines being drawn. Miranda was warning me off, threatening to sabotage any opportunity that might come from my connection with Catherine Walsh, but she had miscalculated. For years, I'd accepted her interference, swallowed my frustration, believed that I needed to play by her rules to succeed in this world. Tonight had shown me another path forward. As I prepared to leave, Victor Winters approached me again, pressing his business card into my hand, much as Catherine had done. If you ever want to discuss the future of authentic fashion journalism, he said quietly, give me a call. Some stories need to be told by someone brave enough to tell them. By the time I left Miranda's perfectly curated gathering, I had 3 business cards in my clutch and a growing sense that the tide was beginning to turn. Miranda had designed this evening to remind me of my place, to showcase her power and my peripheral status. Instead, she had inadvertently given me access to exactly the people I needed to meet. As I rode the elevator down from her penthouse, I felt the weight of years of suppressed anger and frustration transforming into something more powerful, determination fueled by purpose. Miranda had taught me to navigate her world by watching her manipulate it. She just never expected me to use those lessons against her. I stepped out into the cool night air, the city still vibrant around me. For the first time in years, I felt truly alive to the possibilities before me. Miranda had shown me who she was once again tonight. Now it was time to show her who I had become. The Monday after Miranda's dinner party dawned bright and clear, a perfect spring day that matched my mood as I prepared to call Catherine Walsh. I'd spent the weekend strategizing with Zoe, researching industry practices, and organizing the mental catalog of questionable behaviors I'd observed during my years in Miranda's orbit. Remember, Zoe said as I picked up my phone, Catherine's business card in hand. This isn't just about getting revenge on Miranda. This is about exposing systemic problems in the fashion industry. I nodded, taking a deep breath, as I dialed. After 2 rings, a crisp voice answered. Catherine Walsh's office. This is Blair Lynch. Ms. Walsh asked me to call. There was a brief pause. 1 moment, please. To my surprise, I was put through immediately. Catherine's voice came through, the line direct and businesslike. Blair, I've been expecting your call. I'd like to meet. Are you free for lunch today? My heart raced. Yes, absolutely. Good. Café Laurent, 12:30. We need to talk about your stepmother and about opportunities at Walsh Media. She hung up before I could respond. I stared at my phone, processing what had just happened. Catherine Walsh wanted to meet me, not for a formal interview, but for a conversation about Miranda. This was moving faster than I had anticipated. At City Style, I tried to focus on my current assignments, but my mind kept returning to the upcoming lunch. What exactly did Catherine want to discuss? Was this a genuine opportunity, or was I walking into another situation engineered by Miranda? Diane noticed my distraction. Everything okay? She asked, pausing by my desk. I hesitated, then decided to trust her. I have a lunch meeting with Catherine Walsh today. Her eyebrows shot up. That was fast. What happened at Miranda's dinner? Party? Let's just say I made some unexpected connections. I lowered my voice. Catherine seemed to realize something was off about my canceled interview. And there was someone else there, Victor Winters from Elegance, who hinted at wanting to expose some of the industry's darker practices. Diane's expression grew serious. Be careful, Blair. Victor and Catherine aren't just powerful, they're players in the same game as Miranda. They might have their own agendas for wanting to talk to you. I know, I admitted. But this might be my only chance to get out from under Miranda's shadow and make a real difference in fashion journalism. Diane studied me for a long moment, then nodded. You're right, just go in with your eyes open. And remember, if you're going to take on the corrupt practices in this industry, you'll need solid evidence. Anecdotes and hearsay won't be enough. I'm working on that part, I assured her. Good. And Blair? She put a hand on my shoulder. Whatever happens, you always have a place here. Don't forget that. Her words steadied me, providing a safety net I hadn't realized I needed. Whatever I was walking into with Catherine Walsh, I wouldn't be left completely vulnerable. Café Laurent was an elegant establishment in the heart of the fashion district, the kind of place where industry deals were made over overpriced salads and sparkling water. I arrived early, selecting a table with a view of the entrance, but partially screened by a decorative plant, a position that would allow me to observe without being immediately visible. Catherine arrived precisely on time, her tailored navy suit and confident stride drawing attention even in this blasé environment. I stood as she approached my table. Blair, she said, extending her hand. Thank you for meeting me. As we settled in and ordered, a niçoise salad for her, a simple pasta. For me, Catherine wasted no time on small talk. Let me be direct, she said, fixing me with an appraising stare. Your interview didn't disappear by accident. I was told you had accepted another position and withdrawn your application. I now suspect that information came from Miranda, though not directly. My suspicions confirmed, I felt a surge of anger followed by vindication. She's done this before, always in ways I couldn't prove. Catherine nodded, unsurprised. Miranda Stanley has been playing these games for decades. I've known her since we were both assistants. Me at Flair, her at Elegance. We came up together, competed for the same positions, dated the same men. A tight smile crossed her face. I know exactly who she is and what she's capable of. Then why would you believe her about my application? I couldn't keep the edge from my voice. I didn't speak to Miranda directly. The information came through HR, who got it from my assistant, who received a call from someone claiming to represent you. She shrugged elegantly. Standard industry manipulation. I might have done the same in my earlier days. The casual admission was jarring. So this is just how things work? Sabotage and lies are business as usual? In certain circles, yes. Catherine took a sip of her water. The fashion industry has always operated on connections, influence, and sometimes intimidation. It's why real talent often gets sidelined in favor of those with the right relationships or leverage. Our food arrived, providing a momentary pause in the conversation. When the server departed, Catherine leaned forward slightly. I'm not telling you this to defend the system, Blair. I'm telling you because I think you might be interested in helping me change it. I set down my fork. What do you mean? Walsh Media is launching a new digital platform focused on transparency in the fashion industry. Working conditions, sustainability practices, the real stories behind the glamorous facade. We're calling it The Seam, exposing what's beneath the perfect stitching. The concept sent a thrill through me. It was exactly the kind of journalism I had always wanted to pursue. And you want me to work on this platform? I want to offer you the position you should have interviewed for. Senior writer, with significant editorial input. Catherine's gaze was steady. Your work at City Style shows promise. You have a voice, integrity, and you're not afraid to question established narratives. Plus, she added with a slight smile, you have unique insight into one of fashion's most influential power brokers. The implication was clear. Catherine wasn't just offering me a job. She was recruiting me for an exposé on the very world Miranda had helped create and maintain. You want me to write about Miranda, I said, making it a statement rather than a question. Not just Miranda. The entire ecosystem of influence peddling, blacklisting, and ethical compromises that has defined fashion journalism for too long. Catherine set her fork down precisely alongside her half-eaten salad. But yes, Miranda would certainly be a central figure in that narrative. I considered her words carefully. This wasn't just about personal revenge anymore. It was about systemic change. But it would also mean publicly confronting my stepmother, potentially destroying the career she had built and the reputation she valued above all else. Why now? I asked. You and Miranda have been in this industry for decades. What's changed? Catherine's expression hardened slightly. The industry is changing, with or without us. Social media has democratized fashion coverage. Young consumers demand ethical practices and transparency. Publications that don't adapt will become irrelevant. It was a pragmatic answer rather than an idealistic one, which somehow made it more credible. Catherine wasn't positioning herself as a moral crusader. She was a businesswoman, recognizing a shift in the market. And Victor Winters? I asked. He approached me at the dinner party too. Is he part of this? Something flickered across Catherine's face. Caution, perhaps. Victor has his own agenda. He and Miranda have a complicated history. I wouldn't put too much stock in whatever he offered. I filed this information away for later consideration. There were clearly layers to the industry politics that I didn't fully understand yet. What would this position involve exactly? I asked, returning to Catherine's offer. Initial salary of $70,000, full benefits, editorial control of your content subject to standard review processes. Catherine's tone was matter-of-fact. You would help shape the direction of the seam, focusing on investigative pieces about the fashion industry's hidden practices. Your first major assignment would be an in-depth look at how power operates in fashion journalism. The relationships, the favors, the retribution. It was a substantial step up from my current position at City Style, both in terms of compensation and influence. And it aligned perfectly with my journalistic ambitions. But there was an obvious conflict that couldn't be ignored. If I take this position, I'd be writing about my own stepmother. Some would call that a personal vendetta, not journalism. Catherine nodded, acknowledging the point. Which is why everything would need to be rigorously fact-checked and supported by multiple sources. Your personal connection gives you insight, but the reporting must stand on its own merits. She leaned forward slightly. And Blair, if you decide to do this, you need to be prepared for the consequences. Miranda won't go down without a fight. She'll use every connection she has to discredit you. I knew she was right. Miranda's influence extended throughout the industry. Taking her on would make me a target for the same kind of manipulation and sabotage she had used throughout her career. I need to think about it, I said finally. Of course. Take 48 hours. Catherine reached into her bag and extracted a folder, sliding it across the table. This is the formal offer letter, along with information about the Seam's mission and initial editorial calendar. Look it over and call me when you've decided. As she signaled for the check, Catherine added, One more thing, Blair. Whatever you decide, I suggest you don't mention this conversation to Miranda, for your own protection. The warning was unnecessary. I had no intention of revealing anything to my stepmother until I was ready to make my move, whatever that move might be. After lunch, instead of returning to City Style, I found myself walking through the city, the folder from Catherine tucked securely in my bag, her offer turning over and over in my mind. This was everything I had worked for. A prestigious position, creative control, the chance to practice journalism with real impact. But it came with strings attached, expectations that I would use my unique access to expose the woman who had married my father and systematically undermined my career. Was I willing to destroy Miranda Stanley in the process of building my own future? And if I did, would I be any better than she was? As I walked, my phone buzzed with an incoming text. It was from a number I didn't recognize. Ms. Lynch, this is Victor Winters. I'd like to discuss a potential opportunity at Elegance. Please call at your convenience. The timing was too perfect to be coincidental. Somehow Victor already knew about my lunch with Catherine. The layers of surveillance and information exchange in this industry were dizzying. I stopped walking, standing still amidst the flow of pedestrians on the busy sidewalk. 2 job offers in one day, both from powerful figures in fashion media, both with their own agendas involving Miranda. Whatever I decided, there would be no going back to the safety of obscurity. I was being drawn into the same web of power plays and strategic alliances that defined Miranda's world. The question was whether I could navigate it without becoming exactly what I despised. My hands trembled slightly as I entered the sleek midtown building that housed Elegance magazine. 2 days after my lunch with Catherine Walsh, I found myself responding to Victor Winters' invitation, not to accept his offer, but to gather more information before making my decision. The receptionist directed me to the executive floor, where Victor's assistant, a rail-thin young man with impeccable style, escorted me into a corner office with sweeping views of the city. Victor rose from behind his massive desk, extending his hand. "Blair, thank you for coming. Coffee? Water?" "Water, please," I replied, taking in the office. The wall of awards, the framed magazine covers, the tasteful but expensive furnishings. This was the domain of someone who had been in the industry for decades, who had seen fashion media evolve from print dominance to digital transformation. "I understand Catherine Walsh has made you an offer," Victor said, without preamble, once his assistant had brought my water and closed the door. I wasn't surprised that he knew, but his directness was unexpected. News travels fast. "It's a small industry at the top." Victor settled back in his chair, studying me. "Catherine's new platform, The Seam, is it? Has an interesting premise. Transparency, ethical reporting, exposing the underbelly of fashion. You make it sound like you don't approve. On the contrary, I think it's long overdue." His expression was unreadable. "I'm just not convinced Catherine is the right person to lead such an initiative." I took a sip of water, considering my response. "And you would be?" A smile creased his face. "Touché, Ms. Lynch. No, I'm part of the old guard, too. My methods have been adaptable to the industry as it exists." The admission was surprisingly candid. "But I recognize the need for change, even if I'm not the one to spearhead it." "Which brings us to why I'm here," I prompted. Victor leaned forward, hands clasped on his desk. "I want to offer you a different opportunity. Not at Elegance, that would be awkward given your relationship with Miranda, but at a new venture I'm personally funding." My curiosity piqued. "What kind of venture?" "A digital media company focused on sustainable fashion and ethical practices in the industry. Similar to what Catherine is proposing, but with a broader scope and more resources." "And how does this involve Miranda?" I asked directly, tired of dancing around the central issue. Victor's expression hardened slightly. "Your stepmother and I have a complicated history. We've worked together for 15 years. I know her methods, her connections, the lines she's willing to cross." "You want me to help you take her down," I translated. "I want you to help me transform an industry that allows people like Miranda to thrive." He opened a drawer and extracted a folder similar to the one Catherine had given me. "The offer is comparable to Walsh Media's, but with more editorial autonomy and a higher salary. $90,000 to start." The figure made me blink. It was substantially more than Catherine's already generous offer and more than double what I currently earned at City Style. "Why me?" I asked, the question that had been nagging at me since the dinner party. "There are more experienced journalists you could approach, but none with your unique perspective and personal motivation." Victor's gaze was steady. "You've lived with Miranda for years, observed her operations from the inside. And you've maintained your integrity despite her influence. That's rare. His assessment was flattering, but also unsettling. Both Victor and Catherine seemed to value me primarily for my connection to Miranda rather than my journalistic abilities. I appreciate the offer, I said carefully, but I need to consider all my options. Of course. Victor slid the folder toward me. Take a few days, but Blair? His tone grew more serious. Whatever you decide, be careful. Miranda has built her career on manipulating people and information. If she suspects what you're considering, she'll move against you immediately. It was the second such warning I'd received in as many days. I'm aware of the risks. As I prepared to leave, Victor added, "One more thing you should know. Your stepsister Livia, she's been in contact with me. She has her own stories to tell about Miranda." The mention of Livia caught me off guard. We had never been close, and after she moved to Paris 5 years ago, our contact had dwindled to obligatory birthday texts and awkward encounters during her rare visits home. Livia is involved in this? Not yet, but she's expressed interest. Think about what that means, Blair. Even Miranda's own daughter wants the truth to come out. The revelation added yet another layer of complexity to my decision. If Livia was willing to speak against her mother, the potential story became even more powerful and more personal. I left Victor's office with a second folder in my bag and an increasing sense that I was being pulled into currents much stronger than I had anticipated. Both Catherine and Victor wanted to use me as a weapon against Miranda, albeit for slightly different purposes. Both offered professional advancement as the reward. The question was whether either of them truly cared about changing the industry, or if this was simply another power play with Miranda as the target. As I exited the building, my phone buzzed with a text from Miranda. "Dinner tonight at Maison. 7 p.m. Need to discuss your career options." My blood ran cold. Somehow, Miranda knew about my meetings. The surveillance network of the fashion world was even more pervasive than I had imagined. I texted back a simple confirmation, then immediately called Zoe. "I need your help," I said when she answered. "Miranda knows something's happening. I need to be ready for tonight." "Come home now," Zoe replied without hesitation. "We'll figure this out." By the time I reached our apartment, Zoe had transformed our small living room into what she called a war room. Her whiteboard was covered with names and connections, and her laptop displayed a detailed spreadsheet. "I've been researching both Catherine Walsh and Victor Winters," she explained, as I dropped my bag containing both job offers. Their histories, publications, major stories, industry reputations. "And?" I prompted, collapsing onto the sofa. "They both have agendas involving Miranda, but they're not exactly the same." Zoe pointed to her notes. "Catherine and Miranda have been rivals forever, competing for the same positions, the same status. It's professional for Catherine. She wants to modernize her media company and sees taking down Miranda as good business. And Victor?" Zoe's expression grew more serious. "That's more complicated. From what I can find, he and Miranda had a brief relationship years ago, before she met your dad. Since then, he's kept her at elegance, despite having the power to remove her. Their dynamic seems intense." "He mentioned Livia has been in touch with him," I added. "Said she has her own stories about Miranda." Zoe's eyebrows shot up. "Your stepsister? The one who escaped to Paris and barely speaks to either of you?" "The very same." I sighed, rubbing my temples. "This is getting more personal by the minute. Which is exactly why you need to be careful." Zoe sat beside me on the sofa. "Blair, both Catherine and Victor want to use you to get to Miranda. They're offering legitimate opportunities, yes, but with strings attached. I know. The question is whether I'm willing to accept those strings to advance my career and potentially expose the toxic practices in the industry." "And to get revenge on Miranda," Zoe added softly. "Let's not pretend that's not part of this." I couldn't deny it. After years of subtle sabotage and undermining, the prospect of finally holding Miranda accountable was undeniably appealing. "So what do I do about dinner tonight?" I asked. Miranda clearly knows something. She never invites me to dinner unless there's an audience she wants to impress. Zoe considered the question. Go, but reveal nothing. Let her talk. Find out what she knows and what she's planning. And Blair? She squeezed my hand. Record the conversation. If she admits to sabotaging your interview or threatens you, that's evidence you can use later. The suggestion made perfect sense, but it also marked a turning point. Recording Miranda secretly was a definitive step from passive victim to active opponent. I'll do it, I decided. And after dinner, I'll call Livia. If she's really willing to speak about Miranda, I need to hear what she has to say. As I prepared for dinner, selecting a conservative black dress that would meet with Miranda's approval, I felt a mix of anxiety and determination. For years, I had navigated Miranda's world by her rules, accepting her interference as the price of maintaining peace in our strange, fractured family. Tonight, I would begin writing new rules, ones that prioritize truth over power, transparency over manipulation. Miranda had taught me how the game was played in her world. Now I would show her I had learned the lessons too well. Maison was the kind of restaurant where the menu had no prices and the clientele all seemed to know each other. Miranda was already seated when I arrived, sipping a glass of wine and typing something on her phone. She didn't look up as I approached, a power move I recognized from countless professional and personal encounters. "You're late," she said, still not looking at me. I checked my watch. "It's 7:02, which is late." She finally raised her eyes, assessing my appearance with the critical gaze that had made models and designers quake for decades. "The dress is acceptable, though you could have made more of an effort with your hair." I touched my loose waves, self-consciously, then caught myself. This was exactly how Miranda operated. Immediate criticism to establish dominance, to keep me off balance and seeking her approval. "I came straight from work," I replied, taking the seat across from her. My phone was in my bag, recording app activated. "You said we needed to discuss my career options," Miranda signaled to the waiter, who appeared instantly. "The usual for me, and my stepdaughter will have..." She paused, giving me the opportunity to order. "Sparkling water, please," I said, ignoring her slight frown at my abstention from alcohol. I needed to keep my wits about me tonight. Once the waiter departed, Miranda set her phone down and fixed me with her full attention, a rare enough occurrence that it raised my internal alarms. "I understand you've met with Catherine Walsh," she said without preamble. "And Victor Winters." There was no point denying it. "Yes. Both have offered you positions, I presume." Again, there was little use in hiding what she clearly already knew. "They have." Miranda took a sip of her wine, her expression unreadable. "And you're considering these offers?" "I am." The waiter returned with our drinks, and Miranda ordered for both of us, another control tactic I had long since stopped fighting. When he left again, she leaned forward slightly. "Blair, let me be direct. Catherine and Victor are using you to get to me. Whatever they've offered, whatever noble mission they've described, the real objective is undermining my position in this industry." "Why would they care so much about you?" I asked, even though Zoe's research had already provided some answers. A tight smile crossed Miranda's face. "Catherine has been trying to supplant me for 20 years. We started as assistants together, but I rose faster, made better connections, secured the more prestigious position. She's never forgiven me for that." "And Victor?" Something flickered in Miranda's eyes, an emotion I couldn't quite identify. "Victor is more complicated. We have history, both professional and personal. He keeps me at elegance because I bring value to the publication, but he's always looking for leverage." It was strange hearing Miranda speak so openly about the industry, dynamics she usually navigated behind a facade of perfect control. I wondered what had prompted this unusual transparency. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "Because you're being naive, Blair." Miranda's tone sharpened. "You think these offers are about your talent, your potential? They're not. You're just a convenient weapon in a long-running power struggle. The assessment stung, partly because it echoed my own doubts. That doesn't mean the opportunities aren't real. Oh, they're real enough. Catherine will give you a position at her new platform. Victor will fund your journalism. But the moment you've served their purpose, helping them damage me, you'll be discarded. You'll be branded as someone who betrayed her own family for professional advancement. Our food arrived, some delicate fish dish for Miranda, a pasta I hadn't ordered for me. I picked at it, my appetite diminished by the tension between us. Is that what you're worried about? I asked. That I'll betray you? Miranda's laugh was soft and without humor. Blair, let's not pretend there's a deep bond of loyalty between us. We've coexisted for 10 years, tolerating each other for your father's sake. Since his death, we've maintained the facade out of habit and mutual benefit. The cold assessment of our relationship was accurate, but still painful to hear articulated so bluntly. Then why do you care what position I take? Why have you consistently undermined my career opportunities? Miranda's expression registered genuine surprise. Is that what you think? That I've been sabotaging your career? I know you have. I struggled to keep my voice level. The Walsh Media interview is just the latest example. You've been doing it for years, making calls, spreading rumors, ensuring I never get a foothold in the industry. Something shifted in Miranda's face, a calculation being made, a strategy adjusted. You misunderstand my motivations, Blair. I haven't been undermining you. I've been protecting you. Protecting me? I couldn't keep the disbelief from my voice. From what? From becoming me. Miranda set down her fork, meeting my eyes directly. This industry destroys people, Blair. It rewards cruelty, compromise, and calculation. It punishes authenticity and integrity. I saw in you what your father valued most: honesty, a genuine passion for meaningful journalism. I didn't want to watch that get ground down by the realities of fashion media. I stared at her, trying to process this unexpected explanation. So when you told me staying a failure will keep you humble, that was, what? Tough love? Poor phrasing, perhaps. Miranda had the grace to look slightly abashed. But the sentiment was genuine. The positions you've been pursuing would have required you to compromise your principles. I was trying to spare you that. It was a masterful pivot, recasting her interference as protection, her sabotage as maternal concern. Was there truth in it, or was this just another manipulation? If you were so concerned about my integrity, why not just talk to me? I challenged. Why the secrecy, the behind-the-scenes maneuvers? Would you have listened? Miranda countered. Or would you have seen it as another attempt to control you? She had a point, but I wasn't ready to concede it. So what are you saying now? That I should decline both offers? I'm saying you should understand what you're getting into. Miranda's tone grew more serious. If you accept either position, with the intent to expose industry practices, particularly my practices, you need to be prepared for the consequences. This world is built on relationships and unspoken agreements. Breaking those carries a price. Is that a threat? It's a reality. Miranda sighed, and for a moment she looked her age, the carefully maintained facade slipping to reveal the weariness beneath. Blair, I'm not your enemy. I've made my choices in this industry, compromises I can live with. I simply wanted a different path for you. The dinner continued, our conversation shifting to safer topics. Industry gossip, the upcoming Fashion Week, the changes in media consumption that were transforming publications like Elegance. Miranda was charming, knowledgeable, even occasionally funny, the version of herself she presented at industry events rather than the cold, critical presence I knew at home. By the time we finished our coffee, I still couldn't determine how much of her explanation to believe. Had she really been trying to protect me all these years? Or was this simply damage control now that I had options beyond her influence? Whatever you decide, Miranda said as we prepared to leave. Remember that actions have consequences beyond What we can initially see, Catherine and Victor have their agendas. Make sure you understand yours. Outside the restaurant, as we waited for our separate cars, Miranda added, "Oh, and if you're speaking to Livia, tell her I miss her. It's been too long since she visited home." My breath caught. Of course, Miranda knew about Livia's contact with Victor. Her information network was impeccable. "I'll tell her if I speak to her," I managed. Miranda's car arrived first. Before getting in, she paused. "Blair, despite what you may think, I have always respected your talent. You have something rare in this industry, a genuine voice. Don't let anyone use it for their purposes rather than your own." With that enigmatic parting statement, she disappeared into her town car, leaving me on the sidewalk with more questions than answers. Back in my apartment, I played the recording for Zoe, who listened with growing disbelief. "That's not what I expected," she admitted when it finished. "Do you believe her? That she was trying to protect you?" I paced our small living room, my mind churning. "I don't know. It makes a certain kind of sense, but it could also be classic Miranda. Rewriting the narrative to position herself as the hero rather than the villain. What about the warnings about Catherine and Victor?" "Those ring more true," I admitted. "They do have their own agendas involving Miranda. The question is whether those agendas align with what I want to accomplish." Zoe nodded thoughtfully. "So what do you want to accomplish, Blair? Is this about getting back at Miranda, or is it about something bigger?" The question cut to the heart of my dilemma. What did I really want? Revenge against Miranda? Professional advancement? Or something more fundamental, a chance to practice? Journalism that mattered, that exposed truths and drove change? I need to talk to Livia, I decided. If she's willing to speak about Miranda, that changes everything. This isn't just about my experiences anymore. I pulled out my phone and found Livia's contact, not used in months except for a perfunctory happy birthday text. It was nearly 11 p.m. in New York, making it 5 a.m. in Paris where Livia lived. Too early to call, but I could text. "Livia, it's Blair. I understand you've been in contact with Victor Winters. I'd like to talk. Can we arrange a call?" I pressed send, not expecting an immediate response. To my surprise, 3 dots appeared almost instantly, followed by a message. "I've been waiting for you to reach out. Video call in 30 minutes? "She's awake," I told Zoe, showing her the response. "And she wants to talk now." "Then talk," Zoe said, gathering her things. "I'll give you privacy. This sounds like a family conversation." After Zoe retreated to her bedroom, I changed into comfortable clothes, made a cup of tea, and settled on the sofa with my laptop. Precisely 30 minutes after her text, a video call request from Livia appeared on my screen. I took a deep breath and accepted the call. Livia's face appeared, her features so similar to Miranda's but softer, less sculpted by ambition and control. At 31, she had built a life completely separate from her mother's influence, working as a curator at a small Parisian art gallery rather than pursuing the fashion career Miranda had envisioned for her. "Blair," she said, her voice carrying a slight French accent after years abroad. "You look tired." "It's been an intense few days," I admitted. "I just had dinner with your mother." A knowing smile crossed Livia's face. "Let me guess. She tried to warn you away from Victor and Catherine." "You know about both of them?" "Of course. Miranda's surveillance network is extensive. She keeps tabs on everyone who might threaten her position." The casual confirmation of Miranda's monitoring was unsettling. Including her own daughter? Especially her own daughter. Livia sipped from a cup of coffee, the early morning light in Paris casting her in a soft glow. "So, you're considering their offers? Good. It's time someone exposed the truth about the fashion industry and about Miranda Stanley." Her directness caught me off guard. "What truth exactly?" Livia's expression grew more serious. "Blair, my mother has built her career on exploitation, manipulation, and fear. She's blacklisted designers who wouldn't give her kickbacks, buried stories about abusive practices at major fashion houses that advertise in elegance, and destroyed the careers of anyone who challenged her methods. These are serious accusations, I said carefully, and I have evidence to support them. Livia leaned closer to her camera. Emails, recordings, documents I took before I left for Paris. I've been waiting for the right opportunity to use them. Why? I asked, the question that had been nagging at me since Victor mentioned Livia's involvement. Why turn against your own mother? Livia was quiet for a moment, her resemblance to Miranda fading as vulnerability crept into her expression. Because she isn't just toxic professionally, Blair. You've lived with her, but you were older when she married your father. I grew up with her constant criticism, her impossible standards, her emotional manipulation. She shaped me into a mini version of herself, and it nearly destroyed me. The pain in her voice was raw and genuine. I had always seen Livia as Miranda's ally, cut from the same cloth. I had never considered that she might have suffered under Miranda's influence even more than I had. The fashion industry enabled her worst tendencies, Livia continued. It rewarded her cruelty, her calculating nature. And she's not unique. The entire system is built on exploitation, from the treatment of young models to the labor practices in manufacturing. So this isn't just about personal revenge for you, I observed. It's about accountability. It's about changing a system that allows people like my mother to thrive while crushing others. Livia's eyes met mine through the screen. What is it? About for you, Blair? The question echoed Zoe's earlier one, forcing me to confront my own motivations. I want to practice meaningful journalism, I said slowly. I want to expose the truth about the fashion industry's practices, and yes, I want to break free from Miranda's interference with my career. Livia nodded. Then we want the same things. The question is how to achieve them. Victor and Catherine both want to use my connection to Miranda, and now potentially yours, to further their own agendas, I pointed out. Of course they do. But that doesn't mean we can't use them to further ours. Livia's smile was reminiscent of her mother's, but with a warmth Miranda's never contained. Blair, we have an opportunity here to tell a story that needs telling, to create change in an industry that desperately needs it. Yes, Victor and Catherine have their own motives, but the platform they're offering is real. So which offer should I take? Livia considered the question. Catherine Walsh is more straightforward. Her rivalry with Miranda is professional, not personal. Her new platform has legitimate backing and a clear mission. Victor, she hesitated. Victor's history with our mother is complicated. His motives are more personal, potentially more vindictive. That aligns with what I've gathered, I admitted. But, Livia added, Victor has more resources and fewer corporate constraints. He's willing to go further, publish more damaging revelations. I weighed the options, considering not just the professional opportunities, but the potential impact on the industry and on Miranda. If I do this, I said carefully, if I accept one of these positions and work with you to expose industry practices, including Miranda's, what happens to her? It was the question I had been avoiding, the moral complexity at the heart of my decision. Whatever Miranda had done, she was still my stepmother, still the woman my father had loved. Livia's expression softened. She loses her position at elegance, most likely. Her reputation suffers. But Miranda is nothing if not resilient. She'll find a way to reinvent herself. And what about our family, such as it is? Blair, that relationship was broken long ago. Miranda made her choices. Livia paused, then added more gently. But exposing the truth doesn't have to be about destroying her personally. It can be about changing an industry that allowed her behavior to flourish. Her framing resonated with me. This wasn't just about Miranda. It was about a system that rewarded manipulation and exploitation, that prioritized power over integrity. Miranda was a symptom, not the disease. I need to think about this, I said finally. About which offer to accept and how to proceed. Of course. But don't take too long. Miranda knows something's happening. She'll move to protect herself. Livia glanced at something off screen. I have to go to work. Send me your decision and we'll talk again. After the call ended, I sat in the quiet of my apartment, processing everything I had learned. The situation was more complex than a simple revenge narrative. Miranda, Catherine, Victor, Livia, all had their own agendas, their own versions of the truth, their own wounds and motivations. And somewhere in that tangle of relationships and rivalries was an opportunity to tell a story. That mattered, to expose practices that harmed real people, to potentially transform an industry I both loved and critiqued. The question was whether I could navigate these currents without losing sight of my own moral compass, without becoming another player in the power games that had defined fashion, media for too long. As I finally went to bed, one thing was clear. Whatever decision I made would irrevocably change my relationship with Miranda, my career path, and perhaps the industry itself. The stakes were higher than I had ever anticipated when I walked into that Walsh Media lobby just a few days ago. Tomorrow, I would make my choice, not just between job offers, but between different versions of my future self. Morning light filtered through my bedroom window as I stared at the ceiling, my decision crystallizing after a night of restless sleep. The path forward was clear now, not easy, but clear. I reached for my phone and sent 2 messages, one to Catherine Walsh accepting her offer at the seam, and one to Livia confirming our collaboration on exposing the fashion industry's hidden practices. The response from Catherine was prompt and professional. Excellent decision. Contract will be messengered today. We start Monday. Looking forward to working with you. Livia's was more personal. Proud of you, Blair. This won't be easy, but it's necessary. I'll send you my files securely later today. With those commitments made, I had one more task before heading to City Style, to give Diane my notice. I needed to move out of Miranda's apartment. After our dinner conversation, continuing to live under her roof felt untenable. She would know about my new position soon enough, and I didn't want to be within her immediate sphere of influence when that happened. Zoe was already awake when I emerged from my bedroom, nursing a cup of coffee at our small kitchen counter. Decision made? She asked, taking in my determined expression. I'm taking Catherine's offer, I confirmed, and working with Livia to tell the truth about industry practices, including Miranda's. Zoe nodded approvingly. Catherine's the better choice, fewer strings attached. There are still strings, I admitted, but they're ones I can live with. The platform she's building aligns with my journalistic goals. And Miranda? I poured myself coffee, gathering my thoughts. This isn't primarily about her anymore. It's about exposing systemic issues in the fashion industry. The exploitation, the ethical compromises, the culture of fear and manipulation. Miranda is part of that story, but not the whole story. That's surprisingly mature, Zoe observed with a small smile. I've had good influences, I replied, returning her smile. Now I need a favor. I'm going to move the last of my things out of Miranda's apartment today. Can you help? Absolutely. Zoe was already reaching for her phone. I'll get my brother's truck. When do you want to do this? Miranda has meetings until late afternoon. I'd like to be gone before she gets home. The plan set, I headed to City Style to break the news to Diane. She was in her office, reviewing layouts for our next issue, when I knocked on her open door. You've made a decision, she said immediately, reading my expression. I have. I took a seat across from her desk. I'm accepting Catherine Walsh's offer at the seam. Diane leaned back in her chair, studying me. Good choice. Victor's offer was more money, I presume. I nodded, unsurprised that she had guessed the details. But with more strings attached. Catherine's platform has a clearer mission, more editorial, independence. And you'll be working with your stepsister to expose industry practices. Now I was surprised. How did you know about Livia? A small smile played at Diane's lips. I've been in this industry for 30 years, Blair. I have my own sources. Livia Stanley has been gathering evidence against her mother for years. It's one of fashion's open secrets. Why didn't you tell me? Because you needed to find your own way to this decision. Diane's expression grew more serious. Taking on. The fashion industry's toxic practices means taking on powerful people with extensive resources. I needed to know you were doing it for the right reasons, not just out of anger at Miranda. Her words reminded me of something Miranda herself had said at dinner, about understanding my own agenda, not just Catherine's and Victor's. I want to thank you, I said, emotion suddenly tightening my throat. For everything you've taught me, for the opportunities you've given me here. You're a talented journalist, Blair. You have integrity and insight, rare qualities in our business. Diane smiled warmly. And this isn't goodbye. We'll still be colleagues, just at different publications. In fact, I suspect we might find ways to collaborate in the future. Her words hinted at something more, a potential alliance I hadn't considered. You've been waiting for something like the Seam to launch, haven't you? A platform focused on industry accountability. Let's just say I've been hoping for a shift in fashion journalism for a long time. Diane's eyes twinkled. Now, when do you start your new position? Monday. But first, I'm moving the last of my things out of Miranda's apartment today. Making a clean break. Good. Diane rose from her desk. Take the rest of the day for that. And Blair? She came around to give me a brief, unexpected hug. I'm proud of you. This is just the beginning of your real career. As I left City Style, weight lifted from my shoulders. Diane's approval meant more than I had realized, confirming that my decision was professionally sound, not just personally satisfying. My next stop was Miranda's Upper East Side apartment. Using my key for what would likely be the last time, I entered the immaculate space that had never truly felt like home. Despite living here on and off for 10 years, I had always been a visitor in Miranda's domain, careful not to disrupt her perfect aesthetic. The apartment was silent, Miranda and her housekeeper both absent as expected. I moved through the space to my bedroom, a tastefully decorated guest room that contained the few possessions I hadn't already relocated to the apartment I shared with Zoe. As I packed my remaining clothes and personal items, memories surfaced of the years spent in this apartment, awkward family dinners after my father died, strained conversations with Miranda, the gradual realization that we would never bridge the gulf between us. Had she really been trying to protect me from the industry's darker aspects, as she claimed? Or was that just a convenient reframing of her systematic undermining of my career? The truth likely contained elements of both, Miranda operating from her own complex mix of motives, some self-serving, some perhaps genuinely concerned. In her study, a space I rarely entered, I paused, noticing the framed photo on her desk. It showed my father, Miranda, Livia, and me at their wedding reception. Dad looked happy, his arm around Miranda's waist, his other hand on my shoulder. I was 12, my smile forced, while 15-year-old Livia stood slightly apart, her expression carefully neutral. We had never been a real family, I realized. Just 4 individuals bound by circumstance rather than genuine connection. Yet my father had loved Miranda. He had seen something in her worth loving, worth marrying, worth bringing into our lives. That recognition softened something in me. Whatever expose emerged from my work with Livia and the Seam, it needed to be fair, factual, and focused on systemic issues rather than personal vindictiveness. Miranda would be part of the story, but not its sole villain. I was placing the photo back on the desk when I noticed a folder partially hidden beneath a magazine, a folder labeled Blair. My heart racing, I slid it out and opened it. Inside were clippings of every article I had ever published at City Style, carefully preserved. There were notes in Miranda's distinctive handwriting in the margins, observations, suggestions, occasional praise. Also in the folder were rejection emails for job applications I had submitted, forwarded to Miranda by contacts throughout the industry. But what shocked me most were the drafts of emails Miranda had written to these same contacts after my rejections. Emails recommending me for other positions, highlighting my strengths, suggesting I would be an asset to their publications when I had gained more experience. The evidence was contradictory, confusing. Miranda had indeed intercepted job opportunities, but had also attempted to steer me toward positions she deemed more suitable, more aligned with what she considered my talents. I was still processing this discovery when I heard the apartment door open. Quickly replacing the folder, I stepped out of the study to find Miranda standing in the living room, her expression unreadable as she took in my packed bags. "You're moving out," she observed, her tone neutral. "Yes," I replied, deciding on directness. "I've accepted a position at The Seam, Catherine Walsh's new platform." Miranda nodded slowly, as if this confirmed something she had already suspected. "And you're collaborating with Livia on an exposé of industry practices." Again, her information network proved impeccable. "Yes. Including my practices," she added, not a question but a statement. I met her gaze steadily. "The story is about systemic issues in fashion media, the ethical compromises, the exploitation, the fear-based culture. You're part of that system, Miranda, an influential part. But it's not just about you." A complex mix of emotions crossed her face. Resignation, perhaps a hint of respect, and something that might have been regret. "You found the folder in my study." "I did." "Then you know the truth is more complicated than you thought." I nodded, acknowledging this point. "You sabotaged some opportunities while creating others. The question is why?" Miranda moved to the window, looking out over the city before turning back to me. "I told you at dinner. I wanted to protect you from becoming like me, from being forced into the same compromises I've made. The positions I blocked would have required you to surrender your integrity. The ones I suggested would have allowed you to build a career without selling your soul." The explanation aligned with the evidence I had found, but it still represented a fundamental violation of my autonomy. "You should have talked to me, Miranda, given me the information and let me make my own choices." "Perhaps." A small, sad smile crossed her face. But control is a hard habit to break, especially for someone who has survived in this industry as long as I have. We stood in silence for a moment, the years of tension between us shifting into something more nuanced than simple antagonism. "Will Livia be returning to New York?" Miranda asked finally, a hint of vulnerability in her voice that I had rarely heard. "I don't know," I answered honestly. "That's her decision." Miranda nodded, accepting this. "When your exposé is published, I'll lose my position at Elegance. Victor has been looking for an excuse to remove me for years." "Probably," I agreed, seeing no point in pretense. "But that depends on how you respond, what you choose to do next." "What do you mean?" An idea that had been forming in my mind crystallized into clarity. "The fashion industry needs to change, Miranda. The exploitation, the ethical compromises, the toxic culture, it's not sustainable. Someone with your experience, your knowledge of how the system works, could help lead that change." She looked genuinely surprised. "You think I could be part of the solution, after being part of the problem for so long?" "I think you have a choice." I stepped closer, emotion making my voice more intense. "You can fight the exposé, deny everything, cling to the old ways until they destroy you. Or you can acknowledge the problems, share your insider perspective, help transform an industry that needs transformation." Miranda studied me with new eyes, as if seeing me clearly for the first time. "You sound like your father. He always believed people could change, that they contained more possibilities than their past might suggest." "He loved you," I said simply. "He saw something in you, worth loving." For a moment, Miranda's carefully maintained facade cracked, revealing a glimpse of the woman my father had fallen in love with. Complicated, flawed, but not irredeemable. "I can't promise anything," she said finally. "But I'll think about what you've said." It wasn't a commitment, but it was more than I had expected. An opening, a possibility of something beyond the adversarial relationship that had defined us for so long. The doorbell rang, breaking the moment. "That's probably Zoe," I said. "She's helping me move my things." Miranda nodded, stepping back to allow me space. "Of course." As I gathered my bags, preparing to leave this apartment for the last time, Miranda spoke again. "Blair, whatever happens next, whatever you write about the industry or about me, make it honest. Make it matter." I met her eyes one last time, recognizing the complexity of the woman who had been my stepmother for a decade, neither the villain nor the protector she had alternately presented herself to be, but something more human, more contradictory. "I will," I promised. And in that moment, I knew it was a promise I could keep. The offices of the Seam occupied the entire 15th floor of a renovated building in Chelsea, the space designed with an aesthetic that balanced fashion-forward sensibility with transparency and openness, glass-walled conference rooms, an open floor plan, sustainable materials throughout. It was my first day, and as Catherine Walsh led me through the space, introducing me to the team she had assembled, I felt a mix of excitement and trepidation. This was everything I had wanted professionally, a platform with resources, reach, and a mission aligned with my values. "Your office is here," Catherine said, showing me to a corner space with windows on two sides, offering views of the city, and natural light that would make any writer envious. "I want you comfortable and inspired for the work ahead." The office was furnished with sleek but practical pieces: a spacious desk, an ergonomic chair, a small conference table for meetings. On the desk sat a welcome basket containing high-end office supplies, a bottle of champagne, and a card reading, "Welcome to the Seam. Time to reveal what's beneath the perfect stitching." "It's perfect," I said, taking in the space that represented a dramatic upgrade from my desk at city style. "Thank you." Catherine leaned against the doorframe, studying me with her shrewd gaze. "I understand you've moved out of Miranda's apartment." News traveled fast, as always in this industry. "Yes, it seemed appropriate, given the circumstances." "And Livia Stanley has agreed to collaborate with us on the industry exposé?" "She has." I met Catherine's gaze directly. "She has extensive documentation about industry practices, including Miranda's." Catherine nodded, satisfaction evident in her expression. "Excellent. That will strengthen our launch feature considerably." "I want to be clear about something," I said, needing to establish parameters from the beginning. "This series isn't about personal revenge against Miranda. It's about exposing systemic issues in the fashion industry, the exploitation, the ethical compromises, the culture of fear. Miranda is part of that story, but not its sole focus." Catherine's eyebrows rose slightly. "Of course, this is journalism, not a vendetta." She moved further into the office, taking a seat at the small conference table. "Though I admit I was initially drawn to your potential because of your connection to Miranda." "I know." I sat across from her, appreciating her candor. "You and Miranda have history, but my work needs to stand on its merits, not just as a weapon in a long-running rivalry." A smile played at the corners of Catherine's mouth. "You're establishing boundaries already. Good. That's what I hoped for when I hired you." She leaned forward slightly. "Yes, Miranda and I have been competitors for decades. Yes, I'll take some satisfaction in seeing her finally held accountable for her methods. But the Seam is about more than one fashion editor's downfall. It's about transforming an industry that's long overdue for change." Her words aligned with my own vision, reassuring me that I had made the right choice in accepting her offer. "So," Catherine continued, all business now, I've scheduled an editorial meeting for 10 o'clock to discuss your series. The working title is Behind the Seam: Fashion's Hidden Practices. We're planning a 6-part investigation, with the first installment to coincide with our launch in 3 weeks. That's an aggressive timeline, I observed. We need to make an impact immediately. This platform will be defined by its first major series. Catherine stood, moving toward the door. I've assigned you a research assistant and access to our legal team. Everything needs to be meticulously documented and vetted. As she left, I took a moment to absorb the reality of my new position. The corner office, the resources, the platform. It was everything I had worked toward professionally. The irony wasn't lost on me that Miranda's attempt to sabotage my Walsh Media interview had ultimately led to an even better opportunity, one with the potential for genuine impact. My phone buzzed with a text from Livia. Files sent securely. Call when you've reviewed. And Blair, thank you for doing this. It matters. I smiled at her message, feeling a connection with my stepsister that had never existed during our years living under the same roof. Adversity had made us allies in a way prosperity never could have. The morning passed in a blur of introductions, orientation, and familiarizing myself with the Seam's editorial systems. By the time the 10 o'clock meeting arrived, I had reviewed enough of Livia's files to understand the scope and significance of what we were undertaking. The conference room was filled with the senior editorial team Catherine had assembled, a diverse group of journalists with backgrounds ranging from traditional fashion publications to investigative news outlets. I recognized several respected names who had left established magazines to join this new venture, suggesting Catherine had been planning the Seam for some time. Blair Lynch has joined us as senior writer and will be spearheading our launch series on industry practices, Catherine announced, gesturing for me to present my initial concept. Standing before this experienced team, I felt a momentary flutter of imposter syndrome. Then I remembered what had brought me here, not just my connection to Miranda, but years of developing my voice as a journalist, of cultivating sources, of learning the industry from both inside and outside perspectives. Behind the Seam will be a 6-part investigation into the hidden practices of the fashion industry, I began, outlining the structure I had developed over the weekend. We'll examine how power operates in fashion media, the relationship between advertising and editorial content, the treatment of models and other creative professionals, manufacturing ethics, sustainability claims versus realities, and potential paths forward for industry reform. As I spoke, I could see engagement and interest in the faces around the table. These were journalists who had chosen the Seam because they believed in its mission, who had likely observed or experienced the same industry dysfunctions I was proposing to expose. The series will feature first-person accounts from industry insiders, documented evidence of unethical practices, and expert analysis of the systemic issues at play, I continued. It will be unflinching but fair, focused on creating accountability and change rather than simply assigning blame. Questions followed about sourcing, legal concerns, potential industry backlash. I answered each one with growing confidence, drawing on both my professional knowledge and the extensive documentation Livia had provided. What about Miranda Stanley? Asked a features editor who had previously worked at Vogue. Given your personal connection, how will you address her role in these practices? It was the question I had been anticipating, the one that went to the heart of my credibility on this project. Miranda will be included where relevant to the larger narrative, I replied carefully. Her actions and methods will be documented with the same rigor as any other figure in the industry. I'm acutely aware of the need to handle this aspect with particular attention to journalistic ethics, which is why all reporting related to Miranda will be reviewed by our legal team and subjected to additional fact-checking. Catherine nodded approvingly. Blair's personal connection to Miranda Stanley gives her insight, but this series is being developed with rigorous journalistic standards. We're not publishing gossip or settling scores. We're exposing systemic issues that affect real people throughout the industry. The meeting concluded with specific assignments, deadlines, and a shared sense of purpose that energized me. This was the kind of journalism I had always wanted to practice, work that mattered, that could drive meaningful change. Back in my new office, I began organizing Livia's files, creating a structure for the massive amount of information she had collected. There were emails documenting preferential coverage in exchange for gifts and access, records of models blacklisted, for reporting harassment, evidence of sustainability claims contradicted by internal documents, and much more. And yes, there was extensive documentation of Miranda's specific actions, her role in suppressing negative stories about advertisers, her systematic undermining of designers who didn't offer her special consideration, her network of informants throughout the industry who kept her apprised of potential threats to her position. It was damning material, made more powerful by its specificity and thoroughness. Livia had been methodical in her documentation, providing dates, contexts, supporting evidence for each claim. This wasn't just a daughter's resentment. It was a comprehensive record of industry dysfunction, with Miranda as a central case study. As I worked, a notification appeared on my computer, an email from Victor Winters. The subject line read simply, "Congratulations." I hesitated before opening it, aware of the complicated dynamics at play. Victor had offered me a competing position, had his own agenda regarding Miranda, and was technically still her boss at Elegance. The message was brief. "Blair, heard about your new position at the Seam. Excellent choice. When you're ready to discuss potential collaboration on your industry investigation, let me know. I have resources that might be useful. Victor." The offer was intriguing, but potentially problematic. Victor's motives regarding Miranda were more personal than Catherine's, his approach potentially more vindictive. Including him in the investigation could add valuable resources but might also compromise the journalistic integrity I was determined to maintain. I saved the email without responding, making a mental note to discuss it with Catherine later. For now, my focus needed to be on developing the series outline and beginning interviews with the sources Livia had identified. As the day progressed, I found myself settling into my new role with unexpected ease. The team Catherine had assembled was talented and committed, the resources at my disposal extensive, the mission clearly defined. By late afternoon, I had drafted a detailed outline for the first installment of Behind the Seam and scheduled interviews with 3 former fashion editors willing to speak on record about advertising influence on editorial decisions. I was reviewing potential graphics for the series when my phone buzzed with an incoming call from an unexpected source. Miranda. For a moment, I considered letting it go to voicemail. Our conversation when I moved out had reached a tentative equilibrium that might be disrupted by further contact. But journalistic curiosity won out, and I accepted the call. "Blair." Miranda's voice was its usual controlled self, but with a new note I couldn't quite identify. "I understand you've started at the Seam today. Congratulations." "Thank you," I replied cautiously, "though I'm surprised you're calling to say that." "I can imagine." A brief pause. "I've been thinking about our conversation, about the choice you presented me with, fighting your exposé or contributing to industry reform." My pulse quickened. "And I'd like to meet to discuss a third option, which is not something I care to explain over the phone." Miranda's tone was measured, careful. "Are you free for coffee tomorrow morning? Somewhere private, away from industry eyes?" I considered the request, weighing potential motives. Was this a genuine olive branch or a strategic move to gain information about our investigation? With Miranda, it could easily be both. "Okay," I agreed finally. "There's a small cafe near my new apartment. I can text you the address." "Thank you." 9 o'clock? That works. After we hung up, I sat back in my chair, contemplating this unexpected development. Miranda reaching out, proposing a meeting, suggesting a third option. It was unlike her to initiate reconciliation or compromise. I was still processing the call when Catherine appeared in my doorway. "Productive first day?" she asked, taking in the organized chaos of my desk. "Very." I gestured to my computer screen displaying the series outline. The first installment is taking shape nicely. I've also scheduled interviews with 3 former fashion editors willing to speak on record. Excellent. Catherine entered the office, closing the door behind her. There's something you should know. I've just heard from a contact at Elegance that Miranda is meeting with Victor this afternoon. Apparently, she requested the meeting herself. This was significant news, Miranda proactively engaging with Victor, who she knew was aligned with our investigation. Any idea what it's about? No. But the timing can't be coincidental. She knows you've started here, knows about our planned exposé. Catherine's expression was calculating. She's making some kind of move. She just called me, I admitted. Asked to meet tomorrow morning to discuss what she called a third option, neither fighting our exposé, nor simply contributing to industry reform. Catherine's eyebrows rose. Interesting. She's reaching out on multiple fronts. What do you think she's planning? With Miranda, it could be anything from a preemptive media strategy to a genuine reassessment of her position. Catherine considered the question. Meet with her, hear what she has to say. But be careful. Miranda Stanley didn't survive in this industry for 30 years without developing exceptional survival instincts. After Catherine left, I returned to my work with renewed focus, but my mind kept returning to Miranda's call and the meeting tomorrow. What was this third option she wanted to discuss? And what was she talking to Victor about at this very moment? The fashion media world was shifting beneath our feet, alliances and adversaries realigning in response to the seam's imminent launch and our planned exposé. For years, I had been a relatively minor figure in this landscape, observing from the periphery. Now I found myself at the center of a transformation that could reshape the entire industry. As I gathered my things to leave for the day, I paused to take in my corner office once more, the tangible symbol of how dramatically my professional life had changed in just a week. From a canceled interview engineered by my stepmother to a senior position leading a major investigative series, I pulled out my phone and texted Livia. Miranda called, wants to meet tomorrow, also meeting with Victor today. Something's happening. Her response came quickly. Be careful, but listen to what she has to say. This could be important. As I stepped out into the evening air, I felt a strange mix of anticipation and caution. Tomorrow's meeting with Miranda might be just another power play in her long career of manipulations. Or it might be something entirely unexpected, a genuine attempt to find a new path forward. Either way, I was no longer the stepdaughter she could easily dismiss or undermine. I had my own platform now, my own power, my own purpose. Whatever Miranda was planning, I would meet her as an equal for the first time in our complicated relationship. The thought brought a smile to my face as I headed home, ready to prepare for whatever tomorrow might bring. The cafe I had suggested for my meeting with Miranda was deliberately distant from the fashion district, a small, unassuming place in my new neighborhood where industry insiders were unlikely to spot us together. I arrived 15 minutes early, selecting a table in the back corner that offered privacy while still allowing me to watch the entrance. At precisely 9 o'clock, Miranda walked in, scanning the space with the assessing gaze that had intimidated. Designers and models for decades. She was impeccably dressed as always, but I noticed subtle differences from her usual style. Her outfit was elegant, but less aggressively fashionable, her makeup lighter, her hair styled more naturally. It was as if she had deliberately softened her appearance for this meeting. I raised my hand slightly, catching her attention. She navigated through the morning crowd with characteristic grace, sliding into the seat across from me. Thank you for meeting me, she said, her tone devoid of its usual cool authority. I was intrigued by your third option, I replied, studying her face for clues to her intentions. The server appeared, and Miranda ordered a simple black coffee, another departure from her usual complicated specialty drink. When we were alone, again, She met my gaze directly. "I met with Victor Winters yesterday," she began without preamble. "He informed me of the SEAM's planned exposé on industry practices, with you as the lead writer and Livia as a primary source." "I assumed he would," I acknowledged, "though I'm curious why he would reveal that to you, given his apparent interest in seeing you held accountable." A small, knowing smile crossed Miranda's face. "Victor and I have a complicated history. He enjoys seeing me in difficult positions, but not necessarily destroyed." "And what did you discuss with him?" "My future at Elegance." Miranda's gaze was steady. "I've submitted my resignation, effective immediately." The news stunned me. Miranda, Stanley voluntarily stepping down from her powerful position? It seemed inconceivable. "Why?" "Because I read the writing on the wall." Her voice was matter-of-fact, without self-pity. "Your exposé is coming, with or without my cooperation. When it's published, my position would become untenable. Rather than being forced out in scandal, I've chosen to leave on my own terms." It, too, was a pragmatic move, typical of Miranda's strategic thinking, but it didn't explain her request for this meeting. "So what's the third option you mentioned?" I asked. Resigning before being exposed isn't really a new approach. "The resignation is just the first step." Miranda took a sip of her coffee. "The third option is collaboration, Blair. Not just contributing to your exposé as a source, but actively partnering in the transformation of the industry." I couldn't hide my skepticism. "Partnering how, exactly?" "I'm launching a consulting firm focused on ethical practices in fashion media and marketing." Miranda reached into her bag and extracted a slim folder, sliding it across the table. "Transparency standards, ethical guidelines for editorial content, sustainable business models that don't rely on the compromises that have defined the industry." Opening the folder, I found a detailed business plan, complete with mission statement, service offerings, and potential clients. It was comprehensive, professional, and seemingly genuine in its commitment to reform. "You've been planning this for some time," I observed, noting the thoroughness of the documentation. "Since our conversation, when you moved out." Miranda's expression softened slightly. "What you said about having a choice, fighting the exposé or helping transform the industry, it resonated. But I realized there was another path, one where I could use my knowledge and connections proactively rather than reactively." The concept was bold, even audacious. Miranda Stanley, long a symbol of the fashion media establishment, reinventing herself as an ethics consultant. It could be seen as cynical opportunism or genuine transformation, depending on one's perspective. "Why?" "Tell me about this," I asked. "Why not just launch your firm and issue a press release?" "Because I want your input, Blair." Miranda's directness was unexpected. "Not your endorsement. I don't expect that, given our history. But your perspective on whether this approach has merit, whether it could contribute meaningfully to the changes needed in the industry." I studied her face, searching for signs of manipulation or calculation. There was strategy here, certainly. Miranda was too experienced not to have multiple motives. But there seemed to be something more as well, something that might actually be genuine. This could be seen as a preemptive move to neutralize the impact of our exposé, I pointed out. A way to position yourself as part of the solution before being identified as part of the problem. "Of course it is," Miranda acknowledged without hesitation. "I'm not claiming some sudden moral epiphany, Blair. I'm adapting to changing circumstances, trying to salvage what I can from a career that's about to be upended. But that doesn't mean the work itself can't be valuable." Her honesty was refreshing, even disarming. This wasn't the carefully controlled Miranda I had known for a decade, but someone more complex and potentially more authentic. "What exactly are you asking me for?" I asked. "Information," she replied simply. "About the scope and focus of your investigation, the timeline for publication, the specific practices you're planning to expose. Not to block or undermine your work," she added quickly, but to align my firm's initial offerings with the issues you'll be highlighting. It was a significant request, essentially asking me to share internal details of the Seams editorial strategy. But it also suggested a potential synergy I hadn't previously considered, the exposé creating awareness of problems while Miranda's firm offered concrete solutions. I can't share confidential editorial information, I said carefully. But I can tell you that we're focusing on 6 major areas of industry dysfunction: influence peddling and editorial decisions, treatment of creative professionals, advertising pressures, sustainability claims versus realities, labor practices, and potential models for reform. Miranda nodded, absorbing this. Comprehensive. And what's your timeline? The first installment publishes with the Seams launch in 3 weeks. The full series will roll out over 2 months. And my role in the narrative? The direct question deserved a direct answer. You feature prominently as a case study in how power operates in fashion media. The documentation Livia provided is extensive and specific. Miranda winced slightly, but didn't seem surprised. I expected as much. And the tone? Is it designed to destroy reputations or drive change? The latter, I assured her. It's direct and unflinching, but the focus is on systemic issues rather than personal attacks. We're aiming for accountability that leads to transformation, not just public shaming. Relief flickered across Miranda's face. That's good to hear. She hesitated, then added, Blair, I've made many choices in my career that I'm not proud of. I've participated in and perpetuated a system that rewards the wrong behaviors and punishes integrity. I can't change that history. But you can acknowledge it, I suggested, publicly as part of launching your firm. That's my intention. Miranda reached into her bag again and pulled out another document. I've drafted an open letter to the industry, acknowledging my role in these practices and committing to helping change them. I'd like your opinion on it. I accepted the document, somewhat dazed by the surreal nature of this conversation. Miranda Stanley, fashion's most formidable gatekeeper, was asking for my feedback on her public mea culpa. Reading through the letter, I was struck by its directness and lack of equivocation. Miranda acknowledged specific instances of ethical compromise, named practices that needed to change, and outlined her vision for a more transparent and ethical fashion media landscape. This is surprisingly forthright, I said when I finished reading. No hedging, no defensive qualifications. If I'm going to do this, half measures won't suffice, Miranda replied. The letter needs to be credible, which means being painfully honest. I considered her entire proposal, weighing its implications for our exposé, for the industry, and for our complicated personal relationship. What about Livia? I asked suddenly. Have you discussed this with her? A shadow crossed Miranda's face. Not yet. Our relationship is even more damaged than yours and mine. But I hope to, if she's willing to speak with me. The vulnerability in her voice was so unlike the Miranda, I knew that it caught me off guard. This wasn't just about professional reinvention. It was about personal reconciliation as well. I can't speak for Livia, I said carefully, but I think your approach has merit. The industry does need both exposure of its problems and practical paths toward reform. Your knowledge and connections could be valuable in that process if they're directed toward genuine change. Miranda seemed to relax slightly, as if my qualified approval meant something to her. Thank you. That's helpful to hear. I should be clear, though, I added, that this doesn't change our exposé. The series will proceed as planned, including the documented evidence of your past actions. I wouldn't expect otherwise, Miranda replied, surprising me again. The industry needs that reckoning, and frankly, I've earned whatever criticism comes my way. She glanced at her watch. I have a meeting with a potential investor in 30 minutes, but before I go, there's one more thing. From her bag, She withdrew a small, elegant envelope and placed it on the table between us. "This is for you. Don't open it now. Read it when you're alone." I stared at the envelope, unsure what to make of this mysterious gesture. "Miranda, it's not manipulation or bribery," she said, correctly reading my suspicion. "Just something I should have given you a long time ago. Something from your father." My heart constricted at the mention of Dad. "What is it?" "Read it when you're ready." Miranda stood, gathering her things. "Thank you for meeting with me, Blair. Whatever happens next, I'm glad we had this conversation." With that, she left, navigating through the morning cafe crowd with her characteristic poise. I remained at the table, staring at the envelope, my mind racing with questions and possibilities. Back at the seam, I found Catherine waiting in my office, her expression expectant. "How did it go with Miranda?" she asked as soon as I walked. I set my bag down, still processing the unexpected direction of the morning's meeting. "She's resigning from Elegance, effective immediately." Catherine's eyebrows shot up. "That's unexpected. Victor didn't mention that when we spoke yesterday." "It's a recent decision, apparently." I described Miranda's proposed consulting firm and her drafted public acknowledgement of past ethical compromises. "Clever," Catherine mused, though there was a hint of admiration in her tone. "She's trying to get ahead of the story, position herself as part of the solution before we can firmly establish her as part of the problem." "That's what I said to her," I agreed. "But I also think there might be something genuine in her approach. The letter she's drafted is surprisingly forthright." Catherine studied me with a shrewd gaze. "You're considering how this affects our series." "I'm considering how to integrate it," I clarified. "Miranda's pivot doesn't change the facts we're reporting or the systemic issues we're exposing. If anything, it adds an interesting dimension, the possibility of transformation, even for those deeply embedded in problematic practices." A slow smile spread across Catherine's face. "That's why I hired you, Blair. You see the bigger picture, the more complex narrative." She stood, decision made. "Proceed with the series as planned, but add this new development. Miranda's resignation and her new venture become part of the story, not an epilogue, but a case study in how the industry might evolve under pressure." "That's exactly what I was thinking," I replied, relieved that Catherine saw the journalistic value rather than just the potential impact on her rivalry with Miranda. "Good. Keep me updated." Catherine moved toward the door, then paused. "Blair, don't let your personal connection to Miranda, complicated as it is, cloud your judgment. This could be genuine transformation, or it could be masterful damage control. Our job is to present the facts and let readers decide." After she left, I closed my office door and finally took out the envelope Miranda had given me. It was sealed, with no writing on the outside. For a moment, I hesitated, suddenly apprehensive about its contents. What could Miranda have kept from me all these years that related to my father? Taking a deep breath, I carefully opened the envelope and withdrew its contents. A single folded page and what appeared to be a small flash drive. The page was a letter, dated just weeks before my father's sudden death 5 years ago. His handwriting, so familiar and yet so painful to see again, filled the page. "My dearest Blair, if you're reading this, something has happened to me, and Miranda has decided it's time for you to know the truth. I've been diagnosed with a heart condition that the doctors say is quite serious. I haven't told you because I didn't want to worry you during your final year of college, but I've prepared this letter just in case. The flash drive contains my private photography portfolio, the work I've continued to do despite the commercial demands that have taken so much of my time in recent years. Miranda has been encouraging me to pursue this work, even as our financial situation would suggest otherwise. She believes in its importance, as do I. Which brings me to what I need to tell you about Miranda. I know your relationship with her has been strained from the beginning. She can be difficult, demanding, even cold at times. but there is so much more to her than what you see. When we met, I was struggling, both financially and creatively. Miranda recognized something in my work that others didn't. She used her connections to get me exhibitions, introductions to commercial clients, opportunities I would never have had otherwise. Yes, she benefits from my success, but she believed in me when few others did. I know she has been hard on you, pushing you to meet impossible standards, but I've come to understand that in her own way, she is trying to prepare you for the realities of the world she knows so well. A world that punishes vulnerability and rewards strength, often at the expense of kindness. Miranda isn't perfect. She has made compromises in her career that trouble her more than she admits. But she is also more complex than the fashion editor persona she presents to the world. She has protected you in ways you don't recognize, shielded you from aspects of the industry that might have corrupted the genuine talent and integrity I see in you. Whatever happens, please try to see the woman I fell in love with. Difficult, complicated, but also capable of surprising depth and occasional grace. I love you, Blair. You have always been my greatest joy and pride. Dad. Tears blurred my vision as I finished the letter, my father's voice so vivid in his written words that it felt as if he were speaking directly to me. The portrait he painted of Miranda was so at odds with my experience of her, and yet, certain moments, certain inconsistencies in her behavior over the years suddenly made more sense. With trembling hands, I connected the flash drive to my computer. It contained hundreds of photographs, stunning artistic works that showed my father's true vision, so different from the commercial photography that had dominated his later career. These were the images he had wanted to create, the art that represented his genuine voice. And according to his letter, Miranda had encouraged this work, had recognized its value even as financial pressures might have suggested focusing solely on commercial projects. It didn't erase the years of criticism, the undermining of my career opportunities, the coldness that had characterized our relationship, but it added complexity, context, another perspective I couldn't simply dismiss. My phone buzzed with a text from Livia. Update? What did Miranda want? I stared at the message, unsure how to distill the morning's revelations into a simple text. Finally, I typed, "A lot to explain. Can you video call tonight?" Her response came immediately. 9 p.m. your time. This sounds significant. Returning the letter and flash drive to the envelope, I tucked it into my bag, then turned my attention back to the work at hand, the exposé that would now include not just an indictment of industry practices, but perhaps also a case study in the possibility of change. The launch of The Seam 3 weeks later coincided with the publication of the first installment of Behind the Seam, Fashion's Hidden Practices. The timing couldn't have been more perfect, just days after Miranda Stanley's public resignation from Elegance and her announcement of a new consulting firm focused on ethical practices in fashion media. The fashion industry was already buzzing with speculation about the connection between these events, creating an ideal environment for our investigation to make maximum impact. I stood in the Seam's office, watching as Catherine addressed the assembled team, champagne flutes in hand for a toast to our successful launch. "Today marks not just the beginning of a new media platform," Catherine declared, "but potentially the start of a transformation in fashion journalism." Behind the Seam has already generated more pre-publication interest than any industry exposé in recent memory. It was true. Advance excerpts had been shared with select mainstream media outlets, creating significant anticipation. The first installment, focused on the relationship between advertising and editorial content, named names, provided documented evidence, and offered a clear-eyed assessment of the systemic pressures that had corrupted journalistic integrity throughout the industry. And yes, Miranda featured prominently, her practices at Elegance detailed with meticulous accuracy. But the article also included her recent pivot, her public acknowledgement of past ethical compromises, and her stated commitment to helping transform the industry. To Blair Lynch, Catherine continued, raising her glass, whose vision and courage have made this series possible. And to all of you who have contributed to launching the Seam with such impact. As glasses clinked and congratulations circulated, my phone buzzed with a text. It was from Miranda. Well done, unflinching but fair. The industry needed this wake-up call. Her response surprised me, though perhaps it shouldn't have after our recent interactions. The Miranda I had known for a decade would have responded to such public criticism with cold fury and strategic counterattacks. This new version, or perhaps this revealed version, seemed capable of accepting accountability as a necessary step toward transformation. Later that evening, as celebration continued around me, I stepped away to a quiet corner to call Livia. Our regular conversations over the past weeks had begun healing a relationship that had never been given a chance to develop during our years as reluctant stepsisters. "It's magnificent, Blair," she said as soon as she answered. "The article is everything we hoped it would be. Honest, substantiated, focused on systemic issues rather than just individual villains." "Thank you," I replied, warmed by her approval. "I couldn't have done it without your documentation. And I couldn't have found a way to use that documentation effectively without your platform," Livia acknowledged. "We make a good team, it seems." We chatted about the initial industry reaction, the social media response, the nervous statements already being issued by publications and brands named in the exposé. "Have you heard from Mother?" Livia asked eventually, her tone careful. "Yes, actually. She texted to say the article was unflinching but fair and that the industry needed this wake-up call." Livia was silent for a moment. "That's unexpected. The Mother I knew would have been plotting revenge, not offering compliments." "She's changed," I said, still somewhat surprised to hear myself saying it. "Or perhaps she's revealing aspects of herself that were always there but hidden." "You sound almost sympathetic toward her," Livia observed, a note of concern in her voice. I considered how to explain the evolution in my perspective. "Not sympathetic exactly, but I've come to see her as more complex than the villain I've cast her as for years. She gave me a letter from my father, written before he died. It showed a side of her I never saw, or never allowed myself to see." "What are you saying, Blair? That we should forgive her for years of manipulation and emotional abuse?" "No," I replied firmly. "I'm saying that people contain multitudes, even people like Miranda Stanley. We can hold her accountable for her actions while also acknowledging the possibility of change, of growth." Livia sighed. "You're more generous than I am. But then, your experience with her was different from mine." "Will you talk to her?" I asked gently. "She wants to reconnect with you." "Maybe, eventually." Livia's tone suggested she wasn't ready yet, and I didn't push. For now, I'm focusing on my life here in Paris, and on our continued collaboration on the remaining articles in the series. After we ended the call, I rejoined the celebration, accepting congratulations from colleagues and industry contacts who had come to support the Seam's launch. The mood was buoyant, energized by the sense that we were part of something meaningful, something that might actually change an industry long resistant to reform. As the evening wound down, Catherine approached me, a thoughtful expression on her face. "I've been watching the industry response to our first article. It's already having an impact. 3 major publications have announced reviews of their editorial. Policies and a prominent designer has terminated their relationship with a factory cited in our sidebar on labor practices." "That's encouraging," I replied, pleased that the reporting was already driving concrete changes. "It is." And interestingly, Miranda's new consulting firm has already been engaged by 2 of those publications. Catherine shook her head in reluctant admiration. "She's positioning herself as the solution to the very problems she helped create. It's masterful, really." "Is that bad?" I asked. "If she's genuinely helping implement better practices?" "No," Catherine admitted. "It's actually quite effective. She has the insider knowledge to guide real change, if that's truly her intention." She studied me with her shrewd gaze. You've changed your perspective on her. It wasn't a question, but an observation. I've complicated my perspective, I corrected. She's still accountable for her actions, both professionally and personally. But I've come to see that the story isn't as simple as I once thought. Catherine nodded slowly. That's the mark of good journalism, Blair. The willingness to see complexity, to resist the easy narrative of heroes and villains. She raised her glass in a final toast. To nuance in an industry that rarely tolerates it. 6 months later, I sat at my desk at the Seam, reviewing the page proofs for the book version of Behind the Seam. The series had expanded beyond its original 6 installments, developing into a comprehensive investigation of fashion industry practices that had garnered industry awards and, more importantly, driven substantial changes in policies and practices throughout the fashion media landscape. My corner office had been personalized over the months. Photography from my father's private portfolio on the walls, books and magazines arranged on shelves, plants adding life to the sleek space. It felt like mine now, earned through work I was proud of rather than connection to someone influential. A knock at my open door drew my attention. Catherine stood there, a slight smile on her face. "Your visitor is here," she said, stepping aside, to reveal Livia. I rose from my desk, crossing the room to embrace my stepsister. Though we had collaborated closely on the series, her work, curating a gallery exhibition in Paris, had kept her from visiting New York until now. The office suits. You, Livia observed, looking around the space with approval. Very much the successful investigative journalist. The exhibition looks amazing, I replied, having followed the opening online. Paris clearly suits you as well. Catherine excused herself, leaving us to catch up. Livia settled into a chair, studying me with an assessing gaze so reminiscent of her mother that I couldn't help smiling. "What?" she asked, noticing my expression. "Nothing, just..." You have her look sometimes, the way you evaluate a situation. Rather than being offended, Livia laughed. "I know. Some influences are impossible to escape entirely. Speaking of mother, have you seen her since the book deal was announced?" "We had coffee last week," I confirmed. "Her firm is doing well, 12 clients now, all implementing new ethical guidelines and transparency standards. She's hired a team of 5 consultants, mostly young journalists committed to industry reform." And how was she? Personally, I considered the question. My relationship with Miranda had evolved over the past months into something neither of us could have predicted. Not close exactly, but marked by a wary respect and occasional moments of genuine connection. "She's different," I said finally. "More authentic, less controlled. The public acknowledgement of her past practices seems to have freed her in some way. She's still Miranda, demanding, exacting, sometimes difficult, but there's less artifice, more genuine engagement." Livia nodded, absorbing this. "I've been thinking about seeing her while I'm in town." "She'd like that," I said carefully, aware of the much deeper wounds in their relationship. "But only if you're ready." "I'm not sure I'll ever be fully ready," Livia admitted. "But I've been doing my own healing work in Paris. And your experience with her suggests there might be value in at least opening a dialogue." We talked more about the book, about Livia's exhibition, about my ongoing work at the Seam. Catherine had recently approved my proposal for a new investigative series focused on sustainability practices in the fashion industry, an expansion of themes introduced in Behind the Seam. "Oh, I almost forgot," Livia said, reaching into her bag. "I brought you something." She handed me a small, flat package wrapped in simple brown paper. Opening it, I found a framed photograph I hadn't seen before. My father with Livia and me at some event years ago, all 3 of us laughing at something off camera. We looked genuinely happy, connected in that moment, despite the complicated dynamics of our blended family. "Where did you find this?" I asked, touched by the unexpected gift. "In Mother's study, believe it or not. She gave it to me when I told her I was coming to see you." Said you might like to have it. The gesture was typical of the new Miranda, thoughtful but understated, acknowledging the past without grand gestures of reconciliation. Thank you, I said simply, placing the frame on my desk where I could see it while I worked. Later that afternoon, after Livia left for her hotel with plans to meet for dinner, I found myself thinking about the journey of the past 8 months. From a sabotaged interview to a corner office, from viewing Miranda as an enemy to seeing her as a complex human being capable of both harm and growth, from isolated stepdaughter to connected professional with genuine impact. My phone buzzed with an email notification, a message from Miranda with the subject line, "For your consideration." Opening it, I found a proposal for a joint article she was submitting for my review. Transformation from within, changing fashion media from the inside out. She proposed that we co-author the piece, combining my investigative perspective with her insider experience. It was an intriguing proposition, professionally valuable but also symbolically significant, a public acknowledgement of our evolved relationship and shared commitment to industry reform. As I considered the offer, my gaze fell on the thank you card I kept on my desk, the one I had sent to Miranda 3 months ago after the seam received its first major journalism award for Behind the Seam. The card featured a simple image of an open door and contained just one line. "Thank you for closing a door that led me to a better one." Miranda had never explicitly acknowledged receiving it, but the shift in our relationship had been noticeable afterward, a thawing, a tentative reaching toward something like mutual respect, if not exactly warmth. I drafted a response to her email. Interesting concept. Let's discuss over coffee next week. I think there's potential here for something meaningful. Pressing send, I turned back to the page proofs for the book, making final notes and suggestions. The work continued, the story evolved, the industry slowly transformed. And somewhere in that process, I had transformed as well, from someone defined by reaction to Miranda's machinations to someone charting her own course, telling stories that mattered, making an impact I could be proud of. The sabotaged interview that had seemed like a disaster had ultimately set me on a path I might never have found otherwise. A path that led not just to professional success, but to personal growth, deeper understanding, and the beginning of healing for wounds I had carried for years. As I looked out from my corner office at the Manhattan skyline, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't experienced since before my father died. Not because everything was perfect or all relationships were healed, but because I had found my voice, my purpose, and my place in a world I was helping to change for the better. Miranda had once told me, "Staying a failure will keep you humble." She had been wrong about that, as she had been wrong about many things. But perhaps we had both learned something important through this journey. That true humility comes not from failure, but from accountability, and that transformation becomes possible only when we honestly face our past actions and make deliberate choices toward a different future. The corner office was nice, the professional recognition gratifying. But the real victory was internal. The knowledge that I had refused to be defined by someone else's narrative, that I had written my own story, one that accommodated complexity, acknowledged pain, and remained open to the possibility of change, even in the most unlikely places.